Imagine standing in a dark forest 40,000 years ago. There's no electricity, no noise, just the sound of the wind and the shadows dancing against the trees. To our ancestors, that forest wasn't just the wood and leaves, it was alive. It was watching. Hello, my name is Moon, and today we are tracing the journey of how we went from that moment, where we were just guests in a living, breathing world, to the cold, calculated logic of the age we live in now. This is the story of how we traded the soul of the earth for the comfort of order. So let's travel back about 40 to 50,000 years, to that moment when something in our brains just clicked, or maybe snapped, and we suddenly became dangerously intelligent and even more dangerously anxious. Back then, there were no temples, no guys in expensive robes, and no rule books to tell you how to get into heaven. The entire world was just one giant, living, and honestly pretty pissed off organism, which is basically the textbook definition of animism. For our ancestors, a storm wasn't just a change in air pressure or some atmospheric static electricity. It was the mood of something way bigger and scarier than they were. When the wind howled, it wasn't just a physical phenomenon, it was a spirit you had to negotiate with. And when you went hunting, you couldn't just slaughter a bear, because that bear was representative of the forest's spiritual power that you had to ritually soothe before you even thought about drawing your spear. It was honestly the most honest form of religion we ever had, because it wasn't about power, money, or control. It was just about trying not to get eaten in the middle of the night. And it's fascinating because we look back at these people as primitives, but they lived in constant, intimate contact with reality, where everything, a rock, a river, or a tree, had a soul, its own personality and an agenda. And if you didn't get that agenda, you simply died. This wasn't just a pretty connection with the woods, it was essentially evolutionary trauma management. Psychologists call it hyperactive agency detection. Our brains are hardwired to assume that every rustle in the bushes is an intent, a personality, basically. If you hear a noise, you don't analyze the physics of the wind. You assume it's a tiger or a spirit, because if you're wrong and it's just the wind, you're fine, but if you're wrong and it's a tiger, you're dead. Our ancestors were the ones who were paranoid enough to see intent in everything, and that bug in our software became the foundation of our entire spiritual history. And with that came the world's first profession, the shaman. Forget whatever you think about them. They were basically the first IT consultants for the supernatural. When the hunt failed or the tribe got sick, people didn't go to a doctor. There was no science. So they went to the guy who knew the code to talk to the spirits. It was the first bureaucracy, only with more feathers, rhythm, and hallucinogens. The pivot point came when we started feeling the need to manifest these forces. And that's where those tiny, often borderline weird figurines come in, like the Venus of whole fells. Even back then, we had this desperate need to own the divine, to hold it in our hands, to keep it close, which was the first step toward thousands of years later, building life-sized statues of gods and bowing down to them. But there is one artifact that totally changes how we see our primitive ancestors, and it's arguably the holy grail of our cognitive evolution. The Lion Man figurine from the Hohenstein-Stadel cave. It's 40,000 years old, and it's not just some random carving, it's a hybrid. A human body with the head of a lion. This is the exact moment we crossed the line. Before this, we were upping the stakes, but we were still just observing nature. But the second someone sat down, took a mammoth task, and carved a creature that did not exist in the real world, they weren't just honoring nature anymore. They were inventing entities. It wasn't a god yet. Maybe, but it was the first time we realized we could create something more powerful than reality itself, and that's a dangerous realization. And then, just when we thought we had the basics figured out, Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey popped up, and it's a total mindfuck for archaeologists. We find these massive 20-ton T-pillars, and they are covered in carvings of vultures, snakes, and scorpions. But here's the weird thing: they have human hands, belts and lion claws, but no faces. Not a single one. We weren't ready to give our gods a face yet. They were too scared, too terrifying to have an identity. And the most sarcastic part of history? We used to think we settled down, started farming, and then had the free time to build temples. Göbekli Tepe proves we did it completely backward. People were still hunters and gatherers, living in tents. And they dedicated that building this massive temple complex was more important than anything else. Imagine the scene: a group of people living on the edge of survival, and they decide the most important thing on planet is to build a massive temple complex to worship some unknown forces. It is, sarcastically speaking, probably the biggest priorities disaster in history. But it proves that the spiritual need was more important to us than bread. They had to force themselves to start farming just to produce enough food to feed the hundreds of people required to build the site. So we basically invented modern civilization with all these taxes, politics and grocery stores just so we could keep our temple construction crew fed. That is a hell of a sacrifice for a stone pillar, if you ask me. And that's when the shift happened. When you are an animist, you can negotiate with the river spirit by tossing in an offering. But once we turn those spirits into defined, powerful gods in these temples, we stopped negotiating and started obeying. We still didn't have a god with a name in that earliest phase. We didn't have a patriarch on a throne, but we had already defined a space where we drew the line between our world and what belonged to the ones above. This is basically the beginning of the end for pure animism, because once you start building a house for a god, you start slowly turning it into a being that is separate from that river or the tree outside. We traded the freedom of a world where everything had a soul for a system that promised order but demanded submission. And that, my friends, is how we started drifting away from the only home we ever really knew, slowly but surely. So, once we finally settled down and realized that agriculture wasn't just a hobby but a full-time, soul-crushing job, the whole vibe of the world changed. We went from being nomadic survivors to city dwellers in places like Uruk in ancient Sumer. And let me tell you, living in a city with thousands of other strangers is a massive shock for a human brain that was evolved to deal with small tribes. You are participating in a temple economy. This is a crucial detail. The ziggurat, those massive stepped pyramid temples, weren't just places to pray. They were the bank, the granary, the government's office, and the distribution center all in one. If you wanted to trade, get grain, or settle a dispute, you went to the temple. And here's the kicker. Writing, that glorious invention we are so proud of, wasn't invented to write poetry or philosophy. It was invented for bean counting. Literally. The earliest cuneiform tablets aren't holy text. They are receipts for barley, sheep, and beer. We needed to keep track of who owed what to the temple, because if you're going to have a massive organized religion, you need an organized way to tax people for it. And this is exactly where the first named gods started to emerge from the mist. We finally get a name on the record. Anu. In the Sumerian pantheon, Anu was the big boss, the sky god, the king of the gods. But notice the shift here. When we were animists, we were dealing with forces of nature that were right in front of us, right? The river, the storm, the bear. But when we moved into cities, our gods moved away from us too. Anu was the sky father, and he was distant. He wasn't the guy you invited for a drink by the stream. He was the remote CEO of the universe, who you only contacted through a very expensive very bureaucratic middleman, the priest. It's genius, honestly. If your god is everywhere and nowhere, you can claim that you speak for him. And suddenly the king of the city becomes the representative of that god on earth. See the pattern? If the king is a tyrant, his god becomes a tyrant. If the king wants to tax your harvest, the god demands the same. We didn't create gods to make us better. We created gods to validate the power structures we were building. The Sumerian tablets like Enuma, Elish or records from Uruk shows us these transitions perfectly. We went from negotiating with the spirits of the grain to bowing before the god of the harvest, who had a name, a family tree, and very specific demands. These gods had personalities. They were petty, they were jealous, they were basically humans with superpowers and zero accountability. It's almost funny when you read the myths. They are just soap operas played out on a cosmic scale. You have Anu, the authority, Enlil, the enforcer who literally tried to drown humanity in the Great Flood because we were too noisy, which is a super relatable complaint if you ever lived in a dense apartment complex. Then we have Enki, the clever god of wisdom, who was constantly trying to help humans behind Enlil's back. It's clear that we were projecting our own political mess onto the stars. We were tired of the chaos of the wild, where a lion could eat you without a trial, so we built cities and invented gods who were also a bit chaotic, but at least they had rules, even if those rules were just do what the priests say or bad things happen. And this brings us to the most cynical but probably most accurate take on history. The invention of the supreme god was the ultimate social glue. When you have a city of 10,000 people, most of whom are strangers, you can't just rely on communal trust anymore. You need a big, scary, invisible authority figure that everyone agrees is real. If you steal from your neighbor, it's not just a crime against the neighbor. It is an insult to Anu or Enlil, and that's a much bigger problem. We effectively outsourced our morality to the heavens, so we could stop killing each other over minor disputes. But we paid a heavy price for it. We traded the raw, terrifying, intimate freedom of the animists for the order of the civilization. We stopped being part of the landscape and started being subjects of the state, and the gods were the ultimate witnesses to that contract. It was a trade-off. Sure, we got civilization, we got writing, we got agriculture, but we also got the idea that we were separate from nature and that the gods were somewhere up there looking down, keeping score of our sins, while the world outside the city walls slowly became just a resource to be exploited rather than a living, breathing partner. So we arrived at the grand consolidation. We gone from negotiating with the tree spirits to filling tax returns to the local gods, and now things take an even more drastic turn. In the transition from the ancient world into the Middle Ages, we see the rise of the ultimate power move, monotheism. If you look at this with a cynical, modern eye, monotheism was the greatest rebranding campaign in human history. Think about it. Polytheism, having a whole pantheon of gods, is messy. It's like a chaotic startup where everyone has a different idea and every city has its own favorite deity. It's impossible to control on an imperial scale, but a single, universal, all-powerful god? That is a monopoly. That is the perfect corporate structure for an empire that wants to rule everything. So before the Roman Empire really pushed the agenda, we saw a quiet revolution in ancient Persia with Zoroastrianism. This was the version 1.0 of the cosmic struggle, by defining the universe as a binary choice, good versus evil, light versus dark. Zoroastrianism created the perfect control mechanism. Suddenly, religion wasn't about appeasing a local weather spirit, it was about morality. You had to choose a side. If you don't follow the rules, you aren't just misguided, you are literally working for the enemy. It was a power dynamic that empires absolutely loved. But it wasn't easy to force this on people. Just look at Pharaoh Akhenaten around 1350 BC. He tried to delete the entire Egyptian pantheon, which had thousands of years of tradition, and replace it with just one sun disk god, the Aten. He was the ultimate cancel culture pioneer. He smashed old idols, closed the old temples, and moved the capital. And the result? The people absolutely hated it. They didn't want a distant, unreachable sun disk. They wanted their familiar, petty, relatable gods who liked beer and had affairs. The second Akhenaten died, the Egyptians scrambled to erase his name from the history and went straight back to the old ways. It's a fascinating historical oops. It proves that monotheism wasn't a natural evolution of human thought. It was a top-down imposition that had to be sold very, very hard to actually take root. Then came the Romans. When the Roman Empire adopted Christianity, it wasn't just a conversion of faith. It was a merger of an empire and a church. It was a logistical masterstroke, basically. The Romans took the Christian structure, which was already hierarchical with bishops and deacons, and adopted it with the state framework. It became a mirror image of the imperial administration. You can't have a unified power if every village is off sacrificing to their own local river spirit. You need one authority, one rule book, one ultimate judge. So we took all those colorful, petty, distinct gods from the past, fired them, and replaced them with a single, abstract, unreachable entity who happens to be the boss of everyone and everything. The most damaging side effect of this? The total death of sacred landscape. In the animist days, the world was alive. In the monotheistic Middle Ages, the world became a creation. It stopped being a partner, it became a product. It was designed for us, which meant we were the only ones who mattered. The tree wasn't a living entity with its own soul. It was just a resource provided by the creator for our convenience. This shift, what sociologists call the disenchantment of the world, gave us the intellectual green light to exploit nature with zero guilt. If the world is just a stage set built for humanity, who cares if you chop down the forest or dam the river? The church solidified this divide. The divine is up there in the sky, and the physical world, the dirt, the animals, and the forest is just temporary and fallen. We effectively quarantined the sacred. We pushed it out of the woods and into stone buildings with stained glass windows. If you wanted to touch the divine, you didn't go for a hike, you went to mass. You went to the institution that held the keys to the kingdom. It's actually pretty dark when you think about it. We spent tens of thousands of years feeling like we were part of a vast, breathing network, and then in a few centuries we were taught that we were the lonely protagonists in a story written by an absent author. We were no longer kids playing in the woods. We were employees of a cosmic corporation waiting for our performance review at the end of our lives. We replaced the mystery of the storm with the dogma of the law. We traded our intimate, terrifying but beautiful connection to the wild for the safety of a universal system. We became incredibly efficient at building, expanding, and conquering, but we became equally efficient at feeling utterly alone in the universe. We had God on our side, sure, but we had lost the company of the forest, the river, and the mountain. We were civilized, we were orderly, and we were fundamentally disconnected from the very thing that gave us life. This was the era where we learned to ignore the heartbeat of the earth, a habit that we are still very much stuck in today. We need to frame this not just technology is cool, but as the moment our ancient spiritual software finally broke the hardware of reality. So we arrived at the final and perhaps the most bizarre chapter of our journey. We spent millennia trying to control the the uncontrollable by inventing spirits in the trees. Then we centralized everything into a single distant god, and now we've done the ultimate irony. We've built our own gods out of silicon and code. Well, think about it. We didn't actually stop being animists. We just changed the environment. We traded the forests for the server farm and the spirits for algorithms. But let's get a little specific, yeah? Why do we treat our devices like they have souls? It's not just a quirk. It's techno-animism, basically. Look at the cultural divide. In the West, they have this horror movie fear of the robot uprising, our modern version of the angry god. But in Japan, with the Shinto traditions, people have been blessing robots and microchips for decades. Why? Because Shintoism teaches that kami, spirits, inhabit everything. To an animist, a robot having a soul isn't a terrifying sci-fi plot. It's just Tuesday. We are collectively moving toward a realization that we always known. We need things to have personalities. And this is where the religion of dataism kicks in. Yuval Noah Harari famously pointed out that we are moving toward a world where we believe the algorithm understands us better than we understand ourselves. In the Middle Ages, you went to the priest for advice. Today you go to the search bar, you ask Google, you ask AI, or you look at your Spotify Wrapped to tell you what your personality is. We are treating data processing as an oracle. When you can't explain why an AI made a specific decision, why it rejected your loan, why it recommended a specific video, that is, by definition, the god of the gaps. We are filling the gap between our understanding and the AI's output with a sense of infallible judgment. We have effectively built a digital ziggurat, and we are paying it with our personal data. But here's the physical reality that hits a little hard. The cloud is a lie. When we talk about the clouds, we are talking about massive, windowless, humming buildings in the middle of the desert that consume more water and electricity than entire cities. These are our new temples. They are the centers of power. And just like the ancient temples were the storehouses for grain, these server farms are the storehouse for the new currency of the universe: information. The priests of this religion aren't in robes. They are software engineers in Silicon Valley, and their scripture is proprietary code that no one else is allowed to read. And the tragedy? We reach the peak of connection. We can video call someone on the other side of the planet in a millisecond, yet we have zero of the intimacy of a hunter-gatherer tribe huddled around a fire, feeling the real, breathing presence of the world. We disenchanted the planet to the point where we are trying to re-enchant it with virtual reality and the metaverse. We are so starved for that feeling of being part of something bigger, of having a soul, that we are willing to live in a digital simulation just to get ahead of it. Maybe the first god wasn't Anu, and maybe it wasn't a SanDisk, and maybe it isn't the algorithm. Maybe the first and only real god was the connection itself, that weird, inexplainable feeling of being part of a living, breathing network. And maybe the crisis we are in right now isn't about finding the next god, but realizing that we never should have walked away from the first one. We were never supposed to be masters of the earth, just its children. And as we sit here staring into our screens, waiting for the AI to tell us how to fix our lives, maybe the answer isn't in the code. Maybe the answer is to finally step away from the machine, walk outside, look at the tree, and realize that for the first time in 40,000 years, we have forgotten how to just listen. We spend so much time trying to become gods, controlling the world, digitalizing our consciousness, outsourcing our morality, that we forgot what it meant to be human. And that, my friends, it's the most profound deep dive of all. We aren't waiting for a new god to save us. We're just waiting for ourselves to remember what it was like to be a part of the world rather than the owner of it. But before you step away from the machine and go back to the real world, I'm really curious to know what you think. Are we really just waiting to be saved by the code, or can we actually find our way back to that first connection? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to drop a like, hit subscribe, turn on the notifications, you know the drill. And if you like to support the channel even more, check out the join button to become a member. You'll get early access to videos and exclusive content made just for you. I appreciate all the love and see you in the next video.